Today, we're looking at a landmark piece of literature that's as much a political statement as it is a personal memoir. It's called The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vasa, the African, written by himself. Published in 1789, this book did something radical for its time. It didn't just describe the horrors of slavery from the outside, it gave a voice to a man who had lived through every stage of the Atlantic slave trade, from the interior of Africa to the counting houses of London. To understand where the story goes, we have to start with the beginning. Equiano begins by describing his home in the Eboe region of Africa. He paints a picture of a society that was structured, moral, and deeply connected to its community. This was a deliberate choice on his part. At the time he was writing, many people in Europe viewed Africans as primitive or uncivilized. By detailing the sophistication of his own people, Equiano was telling his readers that the people being kidnapped and sold into slavery were not savages, but human beings with complex cultures and families. Then comes the trauma that defines the first act of his life. Equiano is kidnapped as a child and forced onto a slave ship for the Middle Passage. He describes this experience with a visceral, haunting clarity. He talks about the suffocating smell of the hold, the screams of the terrified, and the sheer brutality of the crew. For a young boy, the experience was an apocalypse. He didn't know where he was going or if he would ever see his family again. This part of the narrative is essential because it establishes the baseline of his suffering, making his later achievements feel all the more improbable. As the story moves forward, Equiano passes through several different owners. He spends time in the West Indies and eventually becomes the property of a naval officer. This is where his life begins to shift. Unlike many enslaved people who were kept in agricultural labor, Equiano found himself in the world of maritime commerce. He learned to sail, he learned to trade, and most importantly, he learned to read and write. He became a skilled navigator and a shrewd businessman. This brings us to a significant phase of his life where he's navigating the complex Atlantic economies of the 18th century. He spends a good deal of time in Philadelphia, and this is a fascinating part of the book. He observes the Quaker community, noting their relative honesty and their religious fervor. He's particularly struck by the preaching of George Whitefield, whose emotional, high-energy style of speaking leaves a deep impression on him. In Philadelphia, Equiano isn't just a servant, he's an active participant in the economy. He's buying and selling goods, managing logistics, and proving that his intellect is equal to, or greater than, that of the men who technically owned him. Throughout this period, Equiano has one singular, driving goal, manumission. He wants to buy his own legal freedom. He spends years meticulously saving money, taking risks in trade, and leveraging every connection he has. He's operating in a world where freedom is a financial transaction. If he can just accumulate enough capital, he can purchase his own body back from his master. But then the narrative takes a sharp, painful turn in Georgia. Equiano and his captain are pursuing what they believe is a massive inheritance left by a deceased silversmith. They've been led to believe that there is a fortune waiting for them, and for Equiano this money represents the final step toward his legal liberty. He's practically at the finish line. When they finally open the man's trunks, the moment is devastating. There is no gold, no deeds, no fortune. Instead, they find a meager $1.50. This isn't just a financial loss, it's a psychological blow. The deception is total. In an instant, the material path to his freedom vanishes. He's left in a state of intense spiritual anxiety and existential crisis. He's forced to confront the fact that earthly wealth is volatile and that the people he trusted could be fundamentally dishonest. As he sails toward London following this disaster, Equiano undergoes a profound internal transformation. He's no longer just fighting for a legal document that says he's free. He's fighting for his soul. He describes a period of intense guilt and fear, wondering if he's abandoned by God or if his life has been a series of meaningless accidents. But this crisis culminates in a moment of divine peace. He experiences a religious conversion, moving from a state of terror to a sense of salvation through Christ. By the time he arrives in London, his priorities have shifted. He finds a spiritual home in the preaching of Reverend Romaine and joins a church fellowship. The book concludes with Equiano having achieved a form of freedom that transcends his legal status. He's no longer just a man trying to buy his body from a master. He's a man preparing his soul for the afterlife. He expresses a desire to be dissolved and reunited with Christ, signaling that he has found a peace that the silversmith's trunks could never have provided. Now that we've walked through the plot, it's worth stepping back to look at what Equiano is actually doing with this story. The most striking thing about the book is how it redefines the concept of freedom. For the first 2/3 of the narrative, freedom is a legal and financial goal. It's about manumission, money, and the right to own one's labor. But by the end, Equiano argues that legal freedom is secondary to spiritual freedom. He suggests that a man could be legally free but still a slave to sin, or legally enslaved but spiritually liberated. This was a powerful rhetorical move, especially for a white Christian audience in the 18th century. He was meeting them on their own religious ground to argue for his humanity. There's also the theme of divine providence. Equiano doesn't see his life as a series of random events. He sees the hand of God in everything: his kidnapping, his survival on the ships, his success in trade, and even the disappointment in Georgia. By framing his life this way, he turns his suffering into a purposeful journey. The failure of the inheritance in Georgia wasn't just a bad break. In his eyes, it was a divine intervention designed to strip away his reliance on money and push him toward God. We should also talk about the role of literacy and agency. Equiano is a master of using the tools of his oppressors to dismantle their arguments. He uses the English language, the laws of commerce, and the tenets of Christianity to prove that he is an equal. He doesn't just ask for freedom, he demonstrates that he is already intellectually and morally free. His ability to navigate the global trade networks of the Atlantic shows a level of competence and sophistication that directly contradicted the racist assumptions of the era. It's also interesting to look at the contrast between deception and truth. The empty trunks in Georgia serve as a perfect symbol for the emptiness of the material world. The fraudulent inheritance is the ultimate lie, while the Bible and the promise of salvation are presented as the ultimate truth. This binary helps Equiano move the reader's focus from the physical world of chains and currency to the spiritual world of grace and redemption. One thing to keep in mind is that Equiano was writing this for a specific purpose. He was an abolitionist. Every part of this narrative is designed to make the reader feel the injustice of slavery. When he describes the Eboe society as civilized, he's making a political argument. When he describes the Middle Passage, he's appealing to the reader's empathy. When he describes his conversion, he's claiming a shared identity with his readers. He's not just telling his life story, he's building a legal and moral case against the slave trade. The ending of the book is particularly poignant because it refuses to give us a simple, happy ending in the way we might expect. He doesn't just say, "and then I was free and everything was great." Instead, he leaves us with a man who is focused on the eternal. He's found a way to be free in a world that spent most of its time trying to keep him in chains. In the end, the interesting narrative is a story about the evolution of a human being. It starts with a boy who is stripped of everything: his home, his name, and his autonomy. It follows a man who fights his way back through the world of money and power, and it finishes with a soul that has found a peace that the world cannot give or take away. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit to not only survive the unthinkable, but to find a way to define freedom on its own terms.